Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is applying new data from NREL's State and Local Planning for Energy SLOPE platform. This webinar is being presented by the Clean Energy States Alliance, also known as Cisa. Before I pass it over to our speakers for today, I'd like to go over a few quick webinar logistics. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of today's webinar. You can call in via telephone, or you can connect via your computer mic and speakers. If you'd like to minimize the webinar console so that you can view the presentation full screen, you can click on the orange arrow that you see circled here. You can also click on that to expand your webinar console. And one of the things that you might like to do with that webinar console is to submit questions and comments. We are going to save some time following the presentation for a Q&A with the audience. We'll get to as many questions as we can, so do type those in when you think of them. And a final note, this webinar is being recorded. We'll send you an email within about 48 hours, likely this afternoon, with a copy of the webinar slides and the recording. And we'll also be posting those on Cisa's website at cisa.org/webinars. So with that, I'd like to now pass it over to our moderator for today's webinar, Nate Hausman. Nate is a project director here at the Clean Energy States Alliance, and he's going to get us started.
Great, thanks, Samantha, and welcome everyone. Sure enough, I am a project director at Cisa, and I mostly focus on solar policy. First, just a quick note about who the Clean Energy States Alliance, or Cisa, is. We are a national nonprofit coalition of public agencies and organizations working together to advance clean energy. We're mostly comprised of state-level agencies, and you can see the logos of our members on this slide. So today's webinar is on a National Renewable Energy Laboratory tool that supports clean energy planning. The tool is called State and Local Planning for Energy, or SLOPE for short. And you may recall that we held a webinar on the SLOPE tool back in July. Well, based on input provided during that webinar and feedback from other users, SLOPE now has new functionality with added data sets. So backed by popular demand is Megan Day to tell us about the newly updated, better than ever SLOPE tool. So I'll introduce Megan and then I'll pass it over to her and she'll do a demo and walk through some of the new functionality and talk through the tool. Megan Day is a senior energy planner at the National Renewable Energy Lab, where she serves as the lab's subject matter expert on state and local clean energy planning. She led the development of city energy profiles for more than 23,400 US cities and the cities leading through energy analysis and planning cities LEAP project, and is currently leading the state and local planning for energy SLOPE platform, which we're going to hear about today. Megan is a certified urban and regional planner with a background in nonprofit management, renewable energy development, and climate action planning. Okay, well, with that, I'll pass it over to you, Megan. Platform's yours.
Thank you so much, Nate. Appreciate it. And it's great to be back here with Cisa and the many amazing partners and stakeholders here. So I am going to be talking about the State and Local Planning for Energy, or SLOPE platform today. And we will focus on some new features, but so folks who weren't here in July can get up to speed. SLOPE is a collaboration between 8 Department of Energy Technology offices and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL. And that is where we get our support and also a lot of the data that you'll be seeing today. SLOPE is meant to be a tool to enable more data-driven state and local energy planning, and we do that by integrating many distinct sources of energy efficiency, renewable energy, and coming in, well, we hope it's going to be April now, is sustainable transportation data and analyses. And these are jurisdictionally resolved data sets. And so it's meant to be an easy-to-access online platform to support state and local planning. And as you can see here, it is a web-based platform. You can go to it and follow along for your own jurisdiction if you'd like. And just a quote here that I'd like to highlight from the Colorado Department of Public Health. Basically, they're saying that a lot of their communities in Colorado, you know, they don't have the funds to support a full climate action planning sort of consultancy, and so Slope can help them prioritize and pick out high impact opportunities. So that's what Slope is, meant to deliver clean energy, jurisdictionally resolved opportunities and potential at a high level. And then there's lots of off-ramps from Slope that you can take to much more detailed tools and models to support your energy planning. So what kinds of questions can Slope answer? Basically, we've got data on consumption, electricity, natural gas, expenditures, and consumption for each jurisdiction by sector. We've got efficiency data to understand what the efficiency potential is in your jurisdiction, renewable energy generation potential, and sustainable transportation, as I said, coming soon, to look at what could the future electricity and fuel consumption and vehicle miles traveled look like under different scenarios. Really excited to integrate that as well to support the sort of trifecta of energy planning, right? Efficiency, renewables, consumption, generation, and sustainable transportation. We also have cost of energy data that we'll show you in just a bit to look at both renewable and utility scale and distributed scale, as well as fossil types of technologies and storage, and what those costs are and how they vary across the country. And we have generation scenarios now to look at what, under different scenarios, what might the grid mix in my state look like as far as the mix of renewables and fossil fuels under different scenarios. So we'll take a look at all of these parts of Slope. But first, I'd like to start off with a poll to look at, before these three slides, what was your familiarity level with Slope, to see where we're sort of starting off here. So if you want to let us know how familiar you are with Slope, as far as, are you seeing it for the first time now? Have you explored it a little bit before? Or have you actually used it and applied it using the data or the visualizations on the platform in your work? So I'd love to hear kind of where people are to know where we should be starting. And as you answer that poll, we're going to switch over and we're going to do a live demo of the Slope platform. All right, so we've got a lot of newbies here. So I will be happy to introduce Slope to you. Thank you so much for joining us and learning more about Slope. It looks like some folks have explored it a little bit, but nobody is, well, very few people have actually applied it. So let's hope we can increase that percentage by the end of our time here. And we'll start in on an introduction to the Slope platform, and hopefully you can share with us, perhaps in the Q&A after, how you might be able to apply it and how we can improve it to be useful for you. So let's see, I'm going to start sharing my screen here, and I will assume it's coming up for you. Let me know if not.
Yeah, we can see
Looks
it.
good.
Great. Okay. Well, welcome to the State and Local Planning for Energy, or Slope platform. We have a whole lot of new features. Slope launched in December 31st of 2019, and so in a beta platform, which we introduced last summer. And now we have a completely redesigned platform. We've got a home page to help kind of orient folks to what the Slope platform is. We're going to get a video tutorial up there very soon, the next couple of weeks. And we have a data viewer that we'll be focusing on, and an about page to help with frequently asked questions, how you should cite the platform, etc. So this is all, again, supported by the Department of Energy offices and looking to make it useful for you, our stakeholders. So please give us feedback. There's a feedback tab here. There's also an email that you can use, and certainly through this webinar today, we'd love to hear from you. There's also a new feature where you can sign in and set up an account, you'll see here. And that way you can save settings as far as which jurisdiction you want to start with, what scale, what time scale, and the like. So we hope you'll take advantage of that. You also can sign up to receive updates on slope through that account feature. All right, so let's start on understanding the slope platform, right? Here we are in the data viewer. We have a wealth of data here resolved at state and local jurisdictional levels. And now you have to go to the little sandwich icon here to pull them down. So here's our layer database. As we mentioned before, we've got data on consumption and efficiency, on generation by renewables, as well as generation scenarios, right? What kind of generation mix might you see on your grid through 2050 under different scenarios? These are only some of them. There's many more, so you can off-ramp to a much more detailed hourly look at generation scenarios. We have the cost of energy, got population projections, and commercial buildings data. So here are some metrics, right, that you can use to normalize by population per capita, or understand what percent of the population, or the number of commercial buildings perhaps that you might want to set a target to impact through efficiency or other programs. So again, lots of different data here. We've got 14 different renewable technologies and scales to choose from. And so there's a lot to absorb. I find the best way to sort of introduce slope is to tell a story. So I'm going to focus on the the county of Milwaukee, right? I know you guys are state folks, but what we've heard from most people is that you are looking at sub-state data, right? You don't want just one number for your entire state, but you want to know the nuance within your state as to your clean energy opportunities and potential. So let's start with the county of Milwaukee. Each of these data sets has a description of what you're looking at, the sources of the data, and off-ramps to the methodologies, the publications, and further tools that you might want to explore. So definitely do check that out. So we worked with the county of Milwaukee and the city to look at their clean energy plans, right? And I'll tell you some of what we found, and hopes that you can also follow some of these pathways, right, to understand your opportunities in your own jurisdictions. So here we're starting off with consumption. This is electricity and natural gas consumption by county, right, for the county of Milwaukee. Here on the left, you always have a map. And once you've selected the jurisdiction, it'll pop up with a chart generally of details on that data for that jurisdiction that you selected. So this is a Coroplast map, and it's showing the sort of intensity, the level of energy consumption. This is combined electricity and natural gas consumption by sector. And so this roughly aligns, as you would expect, with cities and counties where there's higher population, where that MMBTU, that's the metric we're looking at, combined consumption increases. So for this data set, we have data, and this is always important to click on the little map icon here, the trifold. We have data at the state, at the county, and at the city level. I'm not going to click city because it takes a little while to load, and we're focusing on counties for now. But in Milwaukee, the county of Milwaukee, you have consumption across, we've got commercial is red, residential is electricity, natural gas are these yellow hues, and then industrial in purple. You can see that consumption is fairly evenly spaced across the sectors and the sources, right? Electricity, natural gas. So for example, commercial natural gas is a bit higher as far as consumption, MMBTUs, than commercial electricity. What we found in Milwaukee, which is often the case, is if you switch this to expenditures, right, that gets switched around. So these are dollars spent on electricity and natural gas for each county. As you can see, it's also correlated with the consumption. But what we find here is that there's much higher expenditures on electricity for the commercial sector, as in the residential sector, more on electricity than natural gas. So what we're seeing here is what we can learn is that energy savings, dollar savings, is much more impactful if you look at the electricity consumption rather than natural gas. That's pretty common across the country, of course, right? Natural gas can be lower cost per MMBTU than electricity. And so looking here to save money for your residents and your businesses in the county of Milwaukee, it's important to focus on electricity savings for this jurisdiction and for many others. So that's kind of one of the takeaways that you can look at as far as consumption and expenditures by city, county, or state. Let's move on, because Milwaukee has some pretty high goals, right, for both equity, but also certainly for clean energy, and they're trying to tie the two, as many folks do. So we'll take a look at how that breaks down and some other tools as well. So, right, we've got lots of high electricity expenditures in the commercial and residential sector. So what might they do? What are their opportunities as far as efficiency? We've got two main data sets here. First, we're going to look at economic and high achievable potential for electricity savings by, I've got to click on Milwaukee here again, by sector. This is based on the EPRI study, and we're reflecting here the electricity efficiency potential savings by sector, red for commercial, yellow for residential, and purple for industrial. So here in Wisconsin, the electricity efficiency potential is really high for commercial, which bodes well for that high expenditures, right? There's a lot of opportunities to save money in the commercial sector, and certainly some, but less so in the residential sector. The bandwidth here is the width between the impact of incentives. So the bottom of the band is if with $0 per megawatt hour incentive, and the upper part of the band is a $20 per megawatt hour incentive. So it looks like incentives are much more impactful in the residential sector than in the commercial sector. So lots of opportunity, and again, there's details as to this study. You can click to it and look at more detail on what kinds of programs they're looking at. But let's also look at, we want to save money for residents, right? A big part of Milwaukee's efforts are equity and jobs impact in their clean energy planning. So let's look down here for residential potential. We've done this amazing research at NREL looking at supercomputing analysis of over 350 million different kinds of homes, and looking at what the state-specific savings potential for electricity savings and natural gas savings or fuel savings is, and we've mapped it all out here by energy saving measure, right? And so here in Wisconsin, if we're looking at, this is for single family homes, what are the highest types of energy or electricity savings measures across the state based on housing in that state, single family housing. So here for electricity savings, LED lighting is very high. Interestingly enough, because you're looking at electricity savings, heat pumps are coming up here. So the second highest potential across the state based on the housing stock there is changing out your electric furnace to a variable speed heat pump at wear out. These are only cost-effective interventions here. We only show those that have net present value. And this is the total gigawatt hour savings potential across the state. Again, you can off-ramp to this very detailed study and the state fact sheets from the RESDOC study, but we're trying to just give it an overview, a high-level overview of your efficiency opportunities here. Followed by upgrading your electric water heater to a heat pump water heater. So lots of opportunities for heat pump if it's already an electric appliance for saving electricity. You can also look at what are your natural gas savings potential and or fuel savings potential. So this includes bottled gas, propane, as well as natural gas and the like. So here, basement wall insulation has a very high impact and potential in Wisconsin, followed by smart thermostats, drill and fill, etc. So looking at high-level opportunities, you might want to take a look at the RESTOC data further to see what your potential is and what combinations of different energy efficiency interventions are cost-effective and can save the most energy in single-family homes. So that's what we have on energy efficiency potential. Often the first place folks start when they want to create a clean energy plan. How much energy can we save in the negawatts, as RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, has termed. So now let's look at energy generation, right? So Milwaukee County and city have high goals for switching to renewable energy. So let's look back at Milwaukee County, and oftentimes a lot of communities want to focus on rooftop PV as a big part of their plans. What we find in Milwaukee County, however, is that if you look at this consumption, their rooftop PV, which is a combination, we broke it down by county now. So this is new data, right? We've got county level residential rooftop PV potential and commercial rooftop PV potential. It turns out that combining these two rooftop PV potential in the county of Milwaukee only gets to about a quarter of their electricity consumption, right? So in talking to the county and the city, they said that SLOPE really helped them understand the scale of what it's going to take to achieve their goals. Similarly, utility scale PV in the county of Milwaukee, this is ground mount, larger facilities, obviously, again, only can cover if you deploy all reasonable, feasible, and suitable kind of land area for utility PV. It still will only get you to a quarter of your electricity consumption as it's currently modeled. So this is a logarithmic scale, which is why it doesn't quite show that visually. So if you deployed all the rooftop PV potential, and that's feasible and suitable rooftops, not shaded, facing substantially south, and all the ground-mounted utility scale PV potential, you're still only going to get to half of your electricity consumption. And that's going to take a long time, right, to do, particularly the rooftop side. That's thousands and thousands of rooftops. So that's telling us two things, right? If you want to achieve high penetration renewable or clean energy, then you need to either look at additional technologies or you need to look outside your borders. So what we know from Milwaukee County, right, if we go in a little closer here, Milwaukee County only has utility PV potential within the county to cover, as I said, about a fourth of their consumption. But in these counties nearby, they have sufficient utility scale PV potential to more than double what the county consumes, right? So it's a clue that you need to maybe look beyond your borders to meet those high renewable penetration goals. Or you need to look at other technologies. So here at the county level, we've also mapped distributed wind potential, which is pretty high in Milwaukee, and we've got land-based wind potential at the county level. So there's those two options. And we also have some new data sets I'm really excited to show you, including geothermal, right? So we've got district heating potential in new construction, which aligns, we're sort of aligning right where we expect potential or population to grow with where there's resource potential. But Milwaukee's not a good resource potential for geothermal district heating. However, they are a good potential for geothermal heat pumps, right? So now we're looking at geothermal heat pump economic potential by county. And so this is also known as ground source heat pumps. And in the county of Milwaukee, you're among the upper echelon here of potential. So this is economic potential, where it's economically viable to deploy ground source or geothermal heat pumps. And that increases slightly over time, right, as technologies and efficiencies improve and potentially those electricity rates and heating costs increase over time. It makes it more economically viable. So that's a good thing to know, right? You're also looking at, where do you have space to bury that ground source heat pump equipment. Another renewable energy potential, right? And then we also have, unfortunately, it's not very good for Milwaukee, but you can look elsewhere in the state for those state folks. We now have local level new stream reach development potential for hydropower and non-powered dam potential, right? So if we look at the state level, obviously Milwaukee's kind of out of luck with new stream reach and new dams, but we've mapped basically the resource area along streams for the potential to generate new, smaller run-of-river hydropower in that area. So, right, we've selected a watershed here along the creek, and we can understand that there is 9 megawatts of capacity potential with a 47 megawatt hour annual generation potential along that. So when you're expanding your consideration of renewable technologies, it's something to consider, as well as non-powered dams. These are existing dams, just no hydropower generation potential there, right? So you can see that, again, Milwaukee doesn't have these resources, but elsewhere in the state and certainly elsewhere across the country, you have a lot of non-powered dams, and these are currently capacity over 1 megawatt. So you can look at different non-powered dams and understand where exactly they are, what the capacity potential is, and what the generation potential is over the course of a year to help you meet renewable goals. So that's a new feature of SLOPE on the renewable side. All right, so we've looked at some different ways to explore your renewable potential, both state and locally, and different technologies. Now let's look at, okay, for the state of Milwaukee, if nothing happens, what might our grid mix look like under a mid-case scenario? This is kind of baseline, right? According to current state deployment, generation mix, and we'll select Wisconsin here, right? What we're looking at in the map is the technology with the largest share of generation. I'll zoom in here a little bit. And this black here is coal. Excuse my dog. All right. So this is a mid-case scenario, kind of, as I said, reference case or business as usual, right? And you can change this to look out over time. So currently, Milwaukee, the largest share generation is from coal, and that remains the case in 2030. And in 2050, it's still going to be the case under kind of a business as usual, no policy interventions situation, right? And here we're showing that kind of grid mix over time by megawatt hours. Even storage is coming in here. So you can understand that in the state of Milwaukee, or state of Wisconsin, obviously there's, if folks want that to change, there's going to have to be some changes through policy or other mechanisms. However, if we look at let's see, we'll look at a low renewable energy cost scenario, then by 2050, with costs dropping more sort of at the very most of the expected range, then we're looking at land-based wind as the technology with the highest share of generation in Wisconsin. So there are some scenarios here that we're showing that show variation by costs, right, over time, if costs drop or if demand drops. So low demand might also mean by 2050 we're still in a coal situation, right, because we don't have new generation needed to meet that demand, I would imagine. So it's a way of understanding for your energy planning what might happen under different scenarios without our intervention through policy or programs or other mechanisms. All right, and that is based on the Regional Energy Deployment System. It's a capacity modeling, capacity expansion model. And again, you can look in the description to find more details and all the kind of documentation you could ever want on that. All right, moving on to the cost of energy, right? If say the County of Milwaukee is looking at what kinds of different technologies they might want to focus on over the coming years, these are levelized costs. So it's not including local incentives or rebates. It's not including the value of those costs to the off-takers, and it's a wholesale cost, basically. So it's problematic, but it does give you a comparison, right, of the different costs. Let's go back to Milwaukee County here. And what we're modeling here is both distributed and renewable, fossil, renewable, distributed, and utility scale, as well as storage costs projected over time. And so here we can see, and this is for new generation, right? So coal is up here at the top, but that is for new generation. It's not existing plants necessarily that already have their capital costs covered. So over time in Milwaukee, by 2050, we're still at the 2050 timeframe here. It looks like commercial rooftop PV is going to be among the lowest cost technologies on a levelized basis by 2050, right? Also among the lower cost here across the country are land-based wind. That's the turquoise. You see that coming down here. And we see hydropower as one of those lowest cost technologies, right? Another reason to look at your new hydropower potential and those sort of smaller scale non-powered dams or new stream reach opportunities. So hydropower is this darker blue here, can be some of the lowest cost technologies on the levelized cost over time. If we look at currently, what is the lowest cost technology? You'll see as it comes up here, it's oftentimes hydro, right? Hydro across much of the country. Another reason to look at those opportunities. So these aren't, hard and fast numbers. This is a range. This is estimated and modeled and at wholesale and levelized. So lots of qualifiers here. But if you want to look at a comparative basis as far as how these technologies going to change in cost over time, this can be a useful comparative approach for that analysis in your planning. All right, finally, I'm going to just take a quick look at the building area data. And again, we'll go back to Milwaukee County. Oh, let's refresh here, sorry. All right. So again, as you're planning out your programs, your initiatives, policies, it's important to just take a look at what are these high-level opportunities and potential. So here we've got commercial building area. We also have count in a different data set by building size and type. So this is useful if you're considering a building disclosure ordinance, right, for commercial buildings. And in Milwaukee, you have a very high percentage of your building area, commercial building area, is in buildings of 50,000 square feet and above. And a big chunk of that is in multifamily, this orange segment, and industrial. So you might want to consider including those sectors or building types in the building disclosure ordinance to have a greater impact on that total area. And perhaps you can set goals as far as the number of buildings you want to be participating in any kind of approach for efficiency or grid interactive, efficient buildings, etc. When you switch to count here, you can see that very few, far fewer buildings are actually in this top echelon for square footage, but much of the built area is in that. Okay, last one, and then we're going to switch over to quickly the LEED tool. And this is levelized cost of saved energy. So let's click on Wisconsin here again. Here, this is based on a study that looked at the program administration cost. So this is to you guys, basically, to administer a program. How much does it cost on a saved energy basis? Turns out that Wisconsin has the lowest cost on a $1 per kilowatt hour basis for administering programs to save electricity. So that's a nice synergy there, having seen how expensive electricity is and how much potential there is for electricity savings through efficiency, particularly in the commercial sector, and how cost effective it is to focus on saving electricity as far as program administration in Wisconsin. So that is kind of the story of Milwaukee County and the broader state of Wisconsin as far as the SLOPE platform goes, and how you can find out some opportunities, some potential for efficiency, for renewables, as well as coming soon for sustainable transportation, and understand some metrics as far as the number of buildings, the way population might change, and how that might change per capita over time. Okay, I often encourage folks to pair the SLOPE tool with the LEED tool. So let's take a quick look at that for the state of Wisconsin, right? The low income energy affordability data, or the LEED tool, is also developed by NREL for the Department of Energy and is made available for your energy planning purposes. It's a way to understand better energy burden as far as the percentage of annual income spent on utility bills, and also how that breaks down by geography, by census tract, and building type and heating fuel. So I won't go into great detail here, but I just wanted to show you that we have some new features now on LEED. For those of you who have seen all this before, you'll see the red outlines are tribal areas, right? So you can see where the overlap of tribal areas and census tract or county or city level energy burden is. If we zoom into the state of, or the county of Milwaukee here, we can see how energy burden breaks out across the county and see that there's a very divergent, right? The average energy burden in some census tracts is much higher than in others, 2% versus 8 or 9, and that's the percentage of annual income, of course. And so this might help folks plan where they want to target programs or incentives to make sure that those who are most in need of reducing their energy burden and their energy costs can benefit from any policies or programs that you might implement. All right, that's the LEED tool. So that's a good overview of SLOPE and a quick overview of LEED, and I hope it will be useful to you in your energy planning. What I'd like to do is leave a lot of time for Q&A and some interaction to hear from you folks, and we can continue to kind of move through the site based on your particular questions. But let's go now to poll number 2 to kind of see what might be most useful for you in the SLOPE tool. So looking to hear your thoughts here as Samantha pulls up poll number 2. And of course, I can't see it because I'm sharing my screen, but looking for your input here as to what are the most useful components of SLOPE. And perhaps Nate could read the results of the poll because I'm not seeing it. That's possible.
People are still
Sure.
voting. So I'm going to
Okay.
give it another minute for people to cast their votes here, and then I'll put the poll results up on the screen. So last call.
And I can tell you right now, it's about an even split between state energy planning and multi-jurisdictional research and analysis. Those are the two top contenders.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous.
Could also be partially a function of the audience today.
Of course. All right, great. Thank you so much, Nate, for giving us the feedback there, and for folks participating to let us know how you might apply slope. Okay. All right. Not being able to see that, I will assume folks have voted, and that result remains. So let's move into some Q&A, and we'll tackle poll 3 kind of in the midst of Q&A, since we have a good amount of time for that, so that I can hear.
Yeah, sorry, Megan. I can tell you that we had 29% say they envision using slope for state energy planning, and 30% say multi-jurisdictional research or analysis, and then 17% both said city energy planning and not sure, and 8% county level energy planning.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Thank you so much, guys. Okay. Oh, now I can see it. Sorry. Great. And that stands true with most responses that we've had. A lot of folks interested in multi-jurisdictional research or analysis. So good to know that that is also the case for many folks here today. Okay. Let's hear some of your questions. Nate's going to moderate here, and we can switch back to the tool if there's something that we want to reference. But for now, you're going to have to look at me and Nate and share your questions.
Apologies about that. First question, we've got a lot of questions, so we'll get to as many as we can. The first question is underlying assumptions for modeling parameters. Can you see those? Can you tell what the back end inputs are?
Good question. And we definitely get that question, right? We're giving you a lot of data, and the first question that comes to many people's minds is, where on earth did you get this? And should I believe it? We are the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and we do not put up anything that's not heavily vetted, ideally published, and peer-reviewed. But at the top of each of these data sets, you will see, as I mentioned, the text there. And in that text, it describes what you're seeing, and it provides links so that you can dig into all of the assumptions that go into this modeling, as well as any published papers describing the methodology, the models, the tools that we're basing this on. For most of these data layers, we're using flagship NREL models, and we're pulling out jurisdictionally resolved data sets, right? So that you can understand, based on your jurisdictions, what is the capacity expansion modeling, for example, or what is the cost projection for different technologies. So as an example, the standard scenarios, looking at the grid mix over time, that's based on the Regional Energy Deployment System, or REDS model, which has been under development for over 18 years at NREL. And so those are different scenarios coming out of REDS, and DGen, which is a distributed generation model, looking at to what extent rooftop, PV, and distributed wind might contribute to those grid mix and generation scenarios. So I hope that answers your question. It's a very good question, and just to let you know that you can dig in as deep as you want to go to all of the sources and models and publications behind this data on slope.
Great, thanks. Does slope also predict carbon savings? For example, from beneficial electrification?
We are looking in this calendar year, which is phase 3 of slope, to add in a scenario model where you can look at different levels of electrification as well as sort of a baseline versus renewable energy deployment scenarios to see what those impacts are on the carbon as well as consumption and kind of grid mix scenarios, right? So we're looking to add in that carbon and greenhouse gas emissions impact of many of these different scenarios this year. It's a priority for us.
Great, thanks. Megan, how often is the energy use data updated?
Good question again. The consumption that we've modeled is based on a 2016 baseline projected in a business as usual case over time. We will hope to update that to a more recent date in the coming months and potentially year. What we may be doing, however, is to switch to the REEDS model, which has a demand side component, right? And that is updated annually. So all the data that you see on levelized cost of energy, for example, is updated each year. So what you saw in the beta version has been updated in 2020 to this new version on slope, and that will continue to happen. So we'll update the generation scenarios and the levelized cost of energy on an annualized basis. As far as consumption, we hope to update it. It may be shifting. So what I see as the root of that question often is, can this modeled energy consumption pick up the impacts of my programmatic changes and policy implementation over time? And the answer is no. What we've done is we've modeled consumption at the city, county, and state levels, and it is not based on us pulling and extracting measured data from all 3,000 plus utilities across the country. So our hope there is it gives you a standardized methodology to understand consumption across jurisdictions and in a standardized format so that you have confidence in and understand the methodology, and it is modeled. So it's not going to pick up those programmatic nuances on a year-by-year basis.
Very good. You may well have just answered this next question, but I'll ask it anyway just to confirm. Does the model allow for rate design to lower expenditure levels? This commenter notes that cost is a function of rate multiplied by use or consumption.
Right. So the levelized cost of energy is levelized. It doesn't take into consideration different rates, right? It's looking more at a wholesale rate. It does consider the investment tax credit, ITC, and the production tax credit at the federal level because those are implemented, and it reflects May 2020 ramp down sunsetting plans. So as far as rate making, that is not picked up as a policy mechanism here on slope. So the generation scenarios reflect as state level renewable portfolio standards, for example, as of May 2020. So they will reflect state level plans and legislated sort of clean energy implementation mandates, but they won't reflect necessarily rate making as far as customer choice and the like. I hope that answers the question.
Great. No, that's helpful. A question about costs. Did you include avoided costs? You know, the sort of net savings, and if so, what kinds of avoided costs? This commenter notes, if I switch to EV and HP hydropower, I assume I get savings in avoided gasoline. Is that kind of consideration accounted for in your cost analyses?
Well, there's two parts of that I think that I could speak to. First is the levelized cost of energy, right, which is taking into consideration the capital costs, the operation and maintenance costs, and the fuel costs of all of the renewable and fossil technologies that are in there. So that doesn't really assume avoided costs, but my assumption is you're also looking at the scenario, standard scenarios. So that, of course, is projecting based on a capacity expansion model, how under different sort of cost metrics, right? Higher renewable costs, lower renewable costs, higher demand, lower demand. How might the grid mix change over time through 2050 based on those variables? So again, it's taking into consideration cost and how transmission, new transmission needs and the cost of that will also impact how different technologies are deployed. So it doesn't necessarily get down into avoided costs other than, you know, when you switch from coal generation to solar generation, you avoid the fuel cost, as an example. So, and then if you stay on new generation that's near existing transmission, you avoid the cost of new transmission build out. So it definitely is taking those kinds of avoided costs into consideration.
Great. Well, perhaps a good follow-on question from the same commenter who asks, whose levelized cost of energy do you use? Is it EIA? Is it yours? What LCOE?
Good question. We provide LCOE for, I believe, 18 different technologies. I can't remember exactly the number, but the fossil technologies are pulled from EIA. So that would include nuclear, natural gas, combined cycle, natural gas, combustion turbine, and natural gas with carbon capture and sequestration. We've got all three of those. And then coal. So there's those fossil technologies we're pulling from Energy Information Administration projected costs. For the renewables, we're using the NREL modeling for cost projections over time on distributed and utility scale.
Great. Is PV potential in using the tool based on economically viable potential, or is it a function of technical physical space potential?
Oh, good question. Thank you for asking that. Because it's a really important distinction to make. So there's this kind of continuum, right, of potential. You start with resource potential, right? How much insulation for PV are you receiving in a particular area? And that's the quality of the sunlight, right? We've tried with Slope to move away from, and along that continuum, away from resource potential to technical generation potential, which is before economic potential or market potential. So we're not looking at, this is not a projection of a forecast of deployment. It's just looking at, it's combining that resource potential. What is your, your solar or your wind or your hydrothermal, whatever resource, plus what is the viability of the land. So we looked at it at the county level, right? It's removing all land from generation that is a water body, that is urbanized, that is a road, that is high slope, or that has other restrictions on the land such that it is not suitable for utility scale PV or utility scale wind, land-based wind, for example. So that's what technical generation potential looks like. It basically is providing you an upper bound for planning purposes. Like, you're not going to get any more than this. Based on your built environment, your geospatial constraints, that is the upper bound for planning purposes. But to actually achieve that technical generation potential, you're right, it does not reflect the market potential based on cost. It does not reflect, a balancing, house by house, for example, for rooftop solar with the load and the generation potential. So we'd love to move down that continuum to provide market and economic potential for each of these technologies, but we don't have it for all of these technologies. So we're sticking to technical potential, which at least gets us further down that continuum.
Great. I'm going to ask a series of 3 questions, and I think they all may be interrelated, which is why I'm going to ask them together. Are the slope and lead tools results able to be exported as overlays in order to filter them together, or are there plans to expand the demographic information to include some of the more social economic indicators for slope, such as area median income or the like? And let's see, what was the third? The third was similar about downloading the maps.
Okay, great question. Thank you. All right, first, exporting or downloading, we'll combine those two. Yes, all of the data layers on slope, you can download the data. I would show you the little button, but it's pretty big on there. We were looking at it. This is all publicly available information. You can download the data sets, and it will give you the data for the entire country, basically. So you might have to go back and find your jurisdiction, but it's helpful for research purposes, et cetera. Same thing with LEAD, right? You can download that data set, and you can use that in an Excel spreadsheet format. I don't believe there are shape files that you can download from LEAD, because it's not a GIS-based platform. So on a data basis, yes, you can export and download all of that data and overlay it in a non-geospatial manner. As far as the integration of the LEAD and slope tool and those demographic, socioeconomic layers, we are working this year to expand upon the LEAD tool and integrate some of the LEAD data into slope in a new and useful way. We just haven't quite figured out how to, what approach that will take yet. So definitely looking at for you and your feedback as to what would be most useful for you, so we don't just duplicate what's already on LEAD, but we add benefit and value add there by integrating that data onto slope.
Great, thanks. We're getting close to the top of the hour, so I'll ask maybe just one more question here. There are still a lot of questions, and there's a lot of questions about different specific scenarios and different specific capabilities, but there's also just a lot of other questions. So apologies if we didn't get to your questions, but it's great to see so much interest in this, and perhaps we can have some follow-up offline. Question: how is energy storage factored in both thermal and electricity? Is there any consideration given to storage?
Absolutely. We could certainly use more, but there's several ways that storage is integrated onto slope. We have the levelized cost of energy. It's delivered as a capital cost for storage, and in that regard, it is a cost per watt, because there's so many different configurations of storage that it's hard to give a cost per megawatt hour, because what's the capacity, what's the duration, et cetera. So we have kind of the standardized cost per watt for storage, and that's integrated into the levelized cost of energy chart, so you can kind of see it dropping dramatically over time. We also have storage in the standard scenarios, and that's building in under different capacity expansion models, to what extent is storage going to be contributing to that grid mix. So we're not dictating, what's generating, providing the generation that is stored but then deployed. But you will see little pink lines on to represent storage in future generation scenarios. So 2 ways in which storage is included on the Slope platform that I hope will be useful to you. And that is primarily battery storage, as in lithium-ion battery capacity.
Thanks, Megan. I know I told you that would be the last question, but there's a bunch of questions about when the sustainable transportation layers might be available. So I thought you could dispense with that one pretty quickly before we sign out here.
We're planning on integrating that data in April. So really excited to do that, and glad to hear there's good interest in it. And so please do get in touch with me and let me know how these scenarios, this data might be of use to you, how you might apply it. We need to make the case that that Slope is being used and having an impact in order to continue on with this work. So love to partner with you in helping you apply it and making that case.
Great, thanks so much. And we will post a recording of this webinar, and happy to pass folks along if there's follow-up. So once again, just want to thank you, Megan. I want to thank our audience for joining today and for all the good questions. And with that, we'll close out. I guess I want to tell you about one other upcoming webinar as well, also featuring an NREL tool. This one is Reopt Lite, and that's going to happen on Tuesday, March 2nd from 2 to 3 Eastern time. We've got a webinar that's going to walk through that tool and some of its capabilities. So we hope you'll join and register for that. And I'll turn it over to you to close out, Samantha.
Hey, thanks, Nate, and thank you, Megan. Again, thank you everyone for attending. Nate and Megan, I noticed we have one more poll. I don't know if you wanted to launch that. Most people are still on the line.
Fabulous. If we can get folks feedback on which parts of Slope they find most useful with poll 3, that would be great. Thank you, Samantha.
Sure, yeah, let's do it. All right, so the poll is up on the screen. I know a couple people have left, but most people are still on the line. Thanks,
so we're just looking at which of these types of data sets are most useful to you: the electricity, natural gas consumption and expenditures, energy efficiency, transportation, which is coming, renewable energy generation potential, and then the generation costs and projected grid mix that you've seen on the standard scenario. Love to have your thoughts as to which you find most useful in your work.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll and I'll share the results here. It looks like you've got a winner.
Right, renewable energy generation potential. That's great to know. We've got a lot of data on that in there. Good to know that it's useful for folks. Thanks for
again. That may be partially a function of the audience too, of course. But. Great. Well, thanks everybody.
Thank you, Nate and Megan.
Go ahead.
And yeah, so Nate's contact info is on the screen here. Oops. And some more info about how you can. Let me switch that out. My slides are messed up. Thank you everybody for attending our webinar today. We're going to close it out now. Thank you everyone for being here. We hope to see you at the next one.